If you lead a restoration company, you already feel the squeeze: labor, materials, overhead, and pricing pressure from every direction. The new Cost of Doing Business, or CODB, report by the RIA distills what's really happening across the industry into benchmarks that owners can act on: margins by service line, overhead ranges, labor mix, and the habits of top performers. So, in today's program, we're going to break down the report's biggest signals and turn them into moves you can run. And to do this, I'm pleased to welcome two experts to the program: Joshua Miller and Kristen Smith, both who do a lot of work with the Restoration Industry Association. Well, let's first get to know you both a little bit. Kristen, ladies first. Tell us about yourself and what you do with your work in RA.
So I am president at Mooring Recovery Services. I've been with the company 2.5 years and am every day is a lesson in restoration. It's certainly a fun industry. The Moorings name is very recognized within the industry. Their family has been part of it for over 75 years. And I work alongside the third generation, John Scott Mooring and Ben Mooring, here at Mooring Recovery Services. So we've got, as we talk through the different segment revenue today, we've got three segments of our business: mitigation, restoration, where we go in, we extract the water, we stabilize the environment, then we restore the property back to its pre-loss condition. And then a unique piece of mooring is that we have a non-insurance related remodel segment that helps kind of stabilize our cash flow and our pipeline of revenue. And so that it comes into play in a lot of my answers and comments as I look through the cost of doing business report. We just recently became really involved in RIA as I kind of took lead of the business, and it's been a wonderful partnership. I craved data and metrics when I started in this industry, having come from oil and gas, where there's an overabundance of KPIs and data. And so this was when I found this report, I was very excited to have some benchmarks to help me diagnose the metrics here at Mooring. And so it's been a very useful report, and happy to be here to talk about it today.
Josh, you and I go back a few years, but tell us about yourself as well.
Yeah, so I work for Rainbow Restoration. Um, I think we've been 42 years now in business since 1981, so 44 years. My math skills aren't the greatest as I get older, but Rainbow Restoration, I'm currently the president of Rainbow. I've worked here for the past 7 years. Actually worked at Rainbow in 2005, 2006 as a franchise business coach. Left to go back into the industry on an independent basis. This is all I've really done for the 30 years of my career. I started working for my father-in-law back in 1996 out on the truck doing water mitigation, carpet cleaning, and now here I am today. But I've been the president for the past 3.5 years. Rainbow Restoration is part of Neighborly. It's interesting to hear Kristen say that she comes from the oil and gas industry and craves data, because Neighborly's new CFO, Ben Lamb, has been with us now for like 4 or 5 months from the oil and gas industry. One of the first things he said was, the restoration space drives me insane because of the lack of data you guys have compared to other industries. So this absolutely does help, and it helps us to see that other industries really run off of data a lot more than the restoration space does, although we're getting better at it. So Rainbow Restoration, we're a franchisor out of Waco, Texas. We're one of 19, North American service brands of Neighborly. We're the world's largest home service franchisor. And so Rainbow provides the business framework and support to people who want to own their own small business, their own restoration company. And similar to Kristen, outside of the remodeling space, but we do mitigation, full service cleaning, all the way through now to a majority of our owners are offering reconstruction services to meet the demand of the industry. So excited to be here.
Well, let's get into it. Just a couple questions. We want to analyze what this means for the industry. Obviously, those who can obtain this report and review it and apply it to their businesses might be a heavy lift, but we can decipher a few things here today and make it easier to see how important it is. So the first point is about the three most important findings in this year's CODB. And why should those who receive this report and analyze it act on it now and not just put it aside and think, I'll do it later? So, Kristen, why don't we start with you?
I focused on kind of three themes here. One of them being overhead crisis, if you will. I think we're all very well aware of the inflation, what it's done to our labor rates, and how it's impacting the profitability of the business. And that was very clear in this report. And as we start to measure more closely overhead as a percentage of revenue, I think there's a few techniques we take at Mooring to ensure that we're automating things and fully utilizing labor. And so I think that was a really interesting trend that was called out quite often throughout the report. The collection cycle. You cannot ignore or avoid the fact that collections are taking 60 to 80 days, and that puts a company in a very precarious position when it comes to cash. And so making sure that you have a strong financial institution as a partner or just a strong position in your business, I think is critical in surviving that long collection cycle. And then also finding ways to match your payment cycle in any way that you can and stretch that with the days to collect. And then last, to scale cautiously, there were interesting metrics that were surprising to me that showed profitability decreasing as you add locations. And I thought that was interesting. As Mooring goes into growth mode, and as we talk about making an investment in our people and our sales department, an investment in some greenfield locations throughout the United States, I will be a little bit more thoughtful and cautious in that growth than maybe prior to reading this report, just based on some of the metrics. It's, I think, a fine line between scaling your business and investing in your business and putting your business, a volatile one at that, with reliant on area-wide events, putting your business in a scary cash position. And so scaling cautiously was a big kind of theme for me as I read through the responses and the data here.
Solid thoughts. Thank you, Kristen. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Josh, how about you? What did you find some things you'd like to highlight as well?
Yeah, a couple of different ones. I'll wrap up with one of the ones that Kristen touched on, but one of them is when we look at mitigation jobs, which I think the majority of people performing restoration services, if they come from other industries or they're in the cleaning industry, that's usually where they cut their teeth. One of the interesting things was that when we look through the report, small mitigation jobs, the profitability that we're seeing in the cost of doing business report jumped way up on jobs that were under $5,000. So the profitability went way up on those smaller jobs. Were jobs that were $20,000 to $50,000. The profitability in the report went way down, which led me to start to say, okay, well, what is driving this? I would love to have even more data to dig into why is that the case? Is it because the $20,000 to $50,000 jobs were more commercial, or there were consultants on the job? Like what can a business owner put into place? So that was one, is that mitigation profitability seemed to jump around a lot from year over year, where we would think that smaller jobs are harder to make money at, or versus the bigger ones, just from the economy of scale. Another one, Kristen touched on it, and it's something that our industry that we see people talking about all the time, even Ed Cross, a restoration advocate for the RIA, the 10 and 10 model. When we think about 10% overhead, completely fictional number. I know when I've been out in the field consulting, red flags start to go up if I see somebody's overhead around 30%. When we look at this, the industry average rose from 38% or up to 38% when it was down around 35 or 36 last year. So is that because of inflation or the tariffs, or people aren't running their jobs as profitably? Something just to look at. And then the last one, Kristen touched on it, which was really the most important thing at Rainbow for me as the president, is that if you don't have cash, you can't stay in business for our owners. And so accounts receivable remains a massive challenge. Kristen talked about, like, hey, the average pay cycle is 60 to 80 days, which is just insane when we think about it. But the report, when we break it down, accounts receivable accounted for a median across all different sectors and sizes of companies of 16.5% of their annual gross revenue, which is just something that if we're not really paying attention to it, can cause us to get into not only a cash flow crunch, but then what does that do? Go back to the thing we just talked about with overhead. Are we having to touch on lines of credit? We hit our line of credit. Now we're paying interest. We're borrowing money. And we know that to borrow money right now costs more money than it did 5 years ago. And then the other thing we'll talk about, or that I have in my notes here for later, is what is the cash crunch or our accounts receivable challenge? What's that doing to our suppliers that instead of paying them in 30 to 45 days, are we slow paying them? And then are we possibly not getting as good of pricing from them because they know it's going to take longer to get paid by us versus new home builders or someone else? So those were a few areas, Jeff, that I thought were interesting in the report.
Josh, let's stick with you on this point. You did touch on this about changes from year to year, but anything else that you noticed? Cost, labor, margins? Maybe thinking about the previous report.
Yeah, just a couple of them. That one of my that we already touched on is total overhead cost, which is like one of the biggest things that, especially as you're scaling a company. We know we've heard before that as we hit $1 million, 3 million, 5 million. As we're a smaller company, even then to 10 million, those are friction points. So there's intensifying cost pressure on everything that we do. And really, as owners, operations managers, we need to be focused on where's our money going? Like, are we negotiating the best deal? Are we having margin creep and overhead creep that we're just not paying attention to because it's like, oh, it's $500 here, it's $600 over there. Before we know it, we've risen 1 or 2 percentage points, which is a big deal. The other one I'll touch on is this something that, again, it seems to be a hot button within the industry, especially as we attend RIA events, is that TPA revenue dependence decreased in this report. So when we think about that, 53% of firms that when we look back to 2024 were using or reported zero, or no, excuse me, 53% of firms this year reported zero revenue from TPAs. Last year, that was at 45%. So whether that's people actively choosing to not engage in that work anymore, maybe they're not getting as many assignments because their SLA scores aren't as good. It's an interesting shift to, or an interesting place to ask questions about, hey, are people moving away from TPAs because of the margin compression, the additional documentation required, which raises overhead, and then it takes longer to get paid with a number of these TPAs on the scorecard. So those were a couple of things that I noticed, Jeff.
That's interesting. Kristen, any observations?
Well,
Maybe about the TPA part as well?
that was on my list as well. So since my time at Mooring, we've not participated in TPA programs, but we've talked a lot about it. One of the reasons is because it provides, I think the industry's looked at to TPAs to provide consistent work. You can forecast I'm going to receive 3 to 5 losses from this TPA a month or whatever it might be. And so that's an attractive reason to consider TPAs. But when we go back and look at the margins, it has not made sense to get back into program work over finding other ways to stabilize revenue or to generate clean revenue with adjacent businesses and service offerings. So I thought this was really interesting, that kind of the analysis we've done at Mooring over the last couple of years in my time there has led to what it seems like and appears the rest of the industry is doing. It gave me confidence that we've made the right decision in diversifying and making sure we have consistent revenue elsewhere, not necessarily through a TPA. I noted was the GP margins are compressed with the rising costs. So similar to what we talked about kind of in the 3 most important findings question. But what I've also noticed is there's not been a huge appetite with our commercial customers to increase prices. And I think it's because it seems like our peers are getting even more competitive when it comes to some of the general labor pricing. And so it's interesting where you've got inflation costs that are increasing, but you don't have the appetite on the customer side to push through those increasing costs. So the industry is really taking on that entire burden. And I'm just wondering at what point it kind of levels out and we start to see that general labor and those general labor increases pass more through to the end customer. It's been hard to push through increases in today's economy, but I think it's justified.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the things that I would say that, Kristen, that's a great line of thought. One of the things for discussion, we've had this discussion amongst Rainbow owners, even at the home office. When we look at other industries, as there's changes in cost of providing services, it's passed right on to the end consumer. Yet in our industry, to your point, Kristen, we seem to be very reluctant to say, hey, this is what it costs for me to do business and provide outstanding service. And because we've always been paid for routinely by the insurance company, once we get that agreed dollar amount, we seem to say, okay, we need to back into that. Whereas medical insurance doesn't do that. We have a new home built, they don't do that. And so at some point, when does that discussion start to happen? I agree with you of, hey, this is what it costs to provide disaster restoration services. And the insurance is viewed more as a contribution towards that versus the total compensation amount that we would work for.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
TPAs are definitely something that the industry wants to talk about. And I think that the RIA is the perfect place to have that conversation. Whether you're pro TPA or anti TPA, the RIA is the only organization that's positioned right now to have these discussions and represent a large swath of the industry versus saying it. Because I know that there's people who say, oh, the RIA should be anti TPA. Yet the RIA's position is, hey, we want to represent, or we do represent all restorers, and we have to have healthy discussions around this.
Kristen, let's go to you on this and let's talk about using benchmarks the right way when we think about the report and what it has. So, as a contractor, to apply benchmarks in this report, pricing, staffing, overhead, how do you look at that? How does that work for your company without just taking numbers and trying to paste them into a spreadsheet, but making it really work?
I always start with my trend. So, what have we done historically? And has that worked for the business? Has it not worked for the business? And alongside kind of the benchmarking metrics that are provided in this report, figure out, okay, what might be the right mix for mooring? Set a baseline or a benchmark that we track to with our scorecard on a weekly basis. And that goal might change, that target might change, but really just use it kind of as as it says, as a diagnostic tool. And it's not black and white. Go back and relate it to your trend as you forecast, utilize, that for your goals and the direction you want to go. And then recognize that there's a very broad range of businesses in this report that are represented in this report. And so I'm going to focus more on commercial only, and I'm going to focus on my specific revenue band. And it's not black and white. It's going to change over time. I think one of the other interesting points is we've got 4 brick and mortar locations, and we are establishing metrics to track those separately. I think it's really important that you evaluate New Mexico different than you do Houston. Coast to coast labor rates, costs of doing business vary wildly, and so I think for these businesses that have a few locations that are widespread, I think it's important to bring it kind of all back home and get to know the locations you're in and separate your national business from your kind of brick and mortar local marketplace business, and be okay with a metric in Houston being very different than what it might be in Albuquerque.
Josh, from a large franchise model, how do you look at these same issues?
Yeah, one of the so there's a couple of things. Number one, this is always something of mine. When I started at Rainbow, came back in 2017, we had like a Rainbow benchmarking survey for a year or two. And everybody would refer to this benchmarking survey like it was like the gospel or like the Bible. And the first thing I always ask is the data that we're getting clean and accurate? Because if you're going to benchmark, like we'll use this example, like, hey, what does a healthy 49-year-old man look like? And you use me as the benchmark. That's and I can list all the reasons why I'm not healthy. So if I was your benchmark, that's a challenge. So one of the things first is to understand that Know-how and the RIA do a phenomenal job of like cleaning through this data and sifting through it. But it is just that it's a benchmarking set of data. So we should use that, as Kristen said, to contextualize or kind of set diagnostic flags for how does that tie into our business. The second thing that I love about this is that because know-how and the RIA do such a phenomenal job and people contribute their information back from the industry, from Rainbow's perspective, it allows us to grab this data and then to help people at the different tier that they're at. If they're a newer business, if they're 1 to 3 million, or we can then pull out the data that applies to those companies, kind of like what Kristen said of, hey, Mooring is going to focus on commercial because that's where they're at. We can help people to focus on you're 1 to 3 million and you're not 20 million. Therefore, don't even look at this segment of the business right now. Let's look at that as a growth opportunity. So those are two areas. The last one I would say is that one of the things that I like about this is that it does help to see what other companies are doing. So let's say someone wants to become a $20-30 million commercial only contractor. Well, they're getting data from individuals such as Mooring, and it's anonymous, but then they can start to look and say, what is my gross margin? Another one that's a big deal for a lot of companies in the industry now that have private equity partners is, what does it look like for the number of people in the office versus the number of people in the field? Like, how many full-time headcount do you have? And is that in line with the rest of the industry? And then if not, are you performing better or worse with that amount of full-time equivalent people in your office, and what adjustments do you need to make? So those are some of the ways to use it. I always go back to just asking myself, hey, this is a benchmarking tool. It has not been like completely fully audited. So sometimes owners will be like, well, I don't meet this number. It's like, well, as long as you're in the ballpark, you're doing fine.
Yeah, these are not audited results.
Yeah.
So
I think too, maybe one of the more undervalued metrics that we spend time with is labor utilization. And I guess that kind of is fed into the overhead as a percentage of revenue. But the businesses like ours are oftentimes waiting on a loss or waiting on an area-wide event. And what my goal has been since coming to Mooring is how can we utilize labor to the highest degree so that on non-disaster work, so that when the disaster comes, we've got more and more people we can pull from a full staff position to take advantage of those events. And so I've been really trying to impress upon my leaders to track labor utilization. And I don't know what the right target is. I know that it should be higher than where we are. And so we're working on defining that too, and ensuring that we've got that clean revenue, reoccurring revenue, where we can always keep people busy, so that we can employ more for those large scale events.
thank you, Kristen. This next question is kind of fun. Josh, we'll go to you to start because it's your turn to start. So let's talk about data to decisions in a month, 30 days. So if a company picks just two things, just two actions from reading this report, what should they be according to Josh? And how do they know if it's going to work or not? How do they measure that? Do you have two for us?
The two things I would say is, number one is monitor or focus on your accounts receivable, both the dollar value of it, but also the cadence. So I would take 30 days if I'm an owner, no matter what level of company I am, whether I'm $500,000 or 15 million, but I would take 30 days and establish a rigid weekly meeting or a weekly cadence for reviewing my AR aging reports and then follow up on everything that's happening. So who owes us money? When are we getting paid? What are the bottlenecks? If I had to, I would say, okay, this one team member is then going to be dedicated to that. All they do is accounts receivable if that's what is needed. But I would just maniacally focus on that number. The other thing I would focus on is that I would measure the average time it takes from the day we get a certificate of completion until we send out the final invoice. In our industry, right or wrong, and I would say that we have a lot of egg on our face as a restoration industry, but we want to constantly complain that the insurance company or the TPAs don't pay us quick enough. But in talking with a number of people in the industry, and some of them even within the Rainbow Network, when we monitor this number, if it's anything over like a day or two, then that's another day or two it's going to take us to get paid. So I don't think we get the information uploaded as promptly as we could. So I would make that one of my metrics. Hey, from the time I had this signed certificate of completion in my hand at the company until that final invoice went out with the required data to get paid or documentation, what does that look like? And then set a benchmark for it and celebrate with the company when we hit it. So one of them would just be all around accounts receivable. The other one would be I would just focus again. I would have an intense focus on job cost management. So, what does this look like? Kristen touched on it with regards to labor utilization. I would focus nonstop on what's going on with my job cost, especially on mitigation contents, board up jobs where we might have project managers assigned to that. Is their time truly being budgeted or assigned to the job the way it should, or are we throwing it into some other bucket? Because we have these really high profit margins on certain jobs, and we walk around events such as like the RIA convention or the local RIA events that they're having in different markets, and we hear things like, "Oh, I'm making 50%, 70%, 30%, whatever the percentage is." Some of them are so high that it's no wonder the insurance company looks at us with a side eye. But I don't know that that's truly the number if we're not depreciating our equipment and assigning project manager time to it, as well as what are the resources with trucks. So my second thing would be is I would have an intense focus on job costing, but having very accurate job costing, really understanding the financial part of it, not just throwing numbers somewhere and taking the easy way out.
Look out, Rainbow franchisees. This might filter down. Good thoughts, Josh. Appreciate that. Kristen, do you have a couple to share with us?
Well, either people are going to think Josh and I talked before this and planned our answers, or I could just go with the great minds think alike. Very similar 2 points, but a little bit of a different approach in how I would take mooring there. So my first one is fix and stabilize the cash conversion cycle. And I've got a whole mix of things that I would like to see there. We are commercial customers only. And I love the blend that we have. And I think we need to continue to ensure we maintain this blend of self-insured versus insured customers, becoming familiar with the insured customers' deductible limits and getting those payments up front. In a large loss, asking for a progress payment at the beginning to help fund that. All of those things are realistic resolutions in managing our cash cycle with some of our larger customers. And oftentimes they're really great partners and they have no problem. Sometimes you just have to ask and they'll push that through. So really encouraging my business developers and leaders to be okay with having those tough conversations to help us manage that cash cycle. And then aligning my business developers are in charge of collections. So align their incentives with their collection timeframe. Maybe they get a little bit more commission if it comes in under 30 days. And there's a tiered approach where they are incentivized to stay on the customer, to talk about the partnership, to ask for progress one or progress invoicing capabilities at all. And have those tough conversations. Don't be afraid to do that. It's in a partnership. Most of our customers, like I said, want to help us there. A couple of other ways I'm going to steal Josh, and I'm going to make a scorecard metric for days between CO to final invoice, because we are our own worst enemy in that. And I completely concur with Josh that needs a focus and improvement within. But then I'm also focused on adjacent businesses. So like I said earlier, growing, whether it's roofing, janitorial, asbestos, environmental, mold remediation, air duct cleaning, finding these losses that aren't necessarily insurance paid, they're budgeted, they're forecastable, they're in our pipeline, and we can expect this regular influx of cash flow from those to kind of fund and offset the insurance paid losses that take this 60 to 80 day cycle to convert. And then my second one is ruthlessly track costs as a percentage of revenue. So going back to labor utilization, I think would be my top one, making sure that every person that's full-time employed is working as much as possible. And then also, I think our team does a relatively good job in the field of capturing costs. I would like to see that done more timely and reviewed more timely. I think oftentimes adjusters come back and say you mentioned you have XYZ equipment, but we don't see a picture of it. So how can we kind of perfect the documentation of the costs in the field? So as we're having those conversations with the client and with adjusters, we have all of the support we need right then and there, and actually should be talking through it with them every single day on the loss. So those conversations on the end are easier, so that we're not adjusting down the revenue. It's approved in a faster manner and then pushed through that payment cycle. So very, very similar. And I say those two because I think they're related. If we can stabilize our cash and manage it better, then we can avoid the costly credit lines, which just further kind of imbalance your cash. And I want nothing more than to be able to continue to hire skilled labor to take advantage of the area-wide events, and keeping them busy with clean revenue is a good way to do that.
I have to confess, I thought you two did talk.
Yeah. I mean, if nothing else, that's, maybe people will listen to those 2 points, since we kind of came
No,
at it from the exact same place.
everything you've shared has been in sync together, but also some unique observations. So it's good information that you're providing today. It definitely shows your expertise in the industry. So we have one more point to cover, and then we'll get some closing thoughts. And Kristen, we'll start with you this time on
Yeah.
this. Talk about common traps, thinking about the biggest misreads or mistakes that you see when people use industry data, because people can take it. Sometimes they can twist it, but how do you see that? And if you'd like to talk about what you would like to see next in the next report, or if you know anything that's coming up.
This one hit home because personally, I say, look, our costs are high. As I'm talking to my private equity partner, I'm investing in our sales team, and we have to expect a ramp up period. And so my overhead costs are going to be high for a little bit while we invest in that. And as I mentioned earlier, I think there's a fine line between investing in a thoughtful and spacious way, where without putting the company in a difficult cash position during a slow season. So I think that's all of the overhead metrics in here are something to focus on, and be sure if you that you're not overextending the business for a growth excuse, if you will. And then I think we talked a lot about TPA. I had that one on here. But banking partner, I have found so many smaller restoration businesses that are scared to engage in a credit line. And I come from accounting and from CFO position. There's so many great local banks that are willing to help small businesses. And even if you never draw on it, it is worth the fee of having it available to you to the event that you get a large loss that comes to your door that you need those funds for. And so I think making sure, I'm too small to have a credit line, or it puts my business at risk. If you use it wisely and you find a good partnership, it is absolutely necessary for you to be able to take advantage of all of the opportunities that come to restoration businesses, small and large. What's next? All automation. I want to know what everyone's doing in terms of automation. I want more insight into, is that part of the reason that some of the overhead as a percentage of revenue is decreasing, or is it lean management? And I have a lot of questions about how that's going to impact the industry. And I think that is a topic everywhere I go, but especially RIA. I hope that they will focus that in Savannah.
Well, that's your wish list, and hopefully they'll listen, because those are some
Yeah.
good ideas.
Hint, hint, Josh.
Josh, you heard it.
A lot of pressure building here on this call for my volunteer stuff.
Oh yeah, I understand that. All right, Josh, you're up. What about you? Things you see that could be mistakes, misreads, and what would you like to see in the next report?
Yeah. So the one thing I want to say is one of the things Kristen just said for anybody watching this, especially if they're newer to the industry or smaller, like what she just shared with people is like invaluable about setting up a line of credit before you need it. When you like the banking industry is one of the greatest things ever of that when you need money, they don't want to give it to you. And when you don't need money, they're like, here, take this. But number two, as you go to scale, or if you're going to add different service verticals, especially commercial or large environmental or reconstruction, what we've talked about for the past 45 minutes to an hour or so is that, hey, payment times are extending. And it's something we all need to focus on, but it's a challenge. So you better have money. So what Kristen just said is invaluable. Like that one nugget for me, even for rainbow owners, as we talk to them as they start to add reconstruction, if they've never done it, is huge because that's one of the things they say is, hey, I need capital. Where do I go find financing or can Neighborly provide it for us? There's all these questions around financing. So, Kristen, great job on that one. Um, Jeff, what I would say is a couple of them. One of them is as we look at this report, I would say that one of the mistakes people could make is looking at the report in its entirety, depending on what size of a company they are, especially if they're a growing company, if they're smaller, they're new in their life cycle of their business, and they might look and say, hey, we need to emulate what the large firms are doing and not understand what that's going to do to their cash flow. Is make sure that they're focusing on where do they belong and focusing on the next 1 year, 3 years, and 5 years of what they're doing. The other one I would say is I've heard this a lot. We can even say it in our own lives, but it's the, hey, we don't track that trap of like, I don't track what is my percentage that I spend on vehicles with regards to fuel, or I don't track like what is my labor utilization. Kristen mentioned a couple times in comparison to my overall overhead. If your labor is low and your overall overhead is high, then that's going to help you understand, hey, you're spending money somewhere else versus if your overhead of your labor is high compared to the rest of your overall overhead, then maybe you're getting great deals on insurance or the rent or the lease you're paying on your building, and your labor utilization isn't good. Those are two things that I really think that people should focus on outside of what Kristen said of like, hey, go get financing. That's a huge deal. To me, it's the one of the top five things. One of them right after you have to sell in order to make things happen. What would I like to see in the upcoming reports or in different reports? I think that one of them would be more clarity around owner compensation. When we look at some of these different sized businesses, is like what does the owner compensation or what does an investor compensation look like, I should say. Owners were smaller. Both Chris and I work with private equity sponsors. And so what is the free cash flow or investor return look like? What should it look like? And then the other one I would say, I already mentioned it, is vendor payment timelines. Not only how fast are we getting paid, but how fast are we paying our vendors? Because I mentioned that it's twofold. Number one, we're not going to find very good vendors if we're dragging out the payment. The other thing that just popped in my head is that the way that our industry is structured is that if we're functioning as the general contractor, we're usually utilizing vendors that don't have brick and mortar the way we do in order to keep cost under control. So how are we affecting their cash flow, and are we putting them at risk of not being around in a year or two? The last thing I would say is that cash is king. We've talked about that for an hour. So if you're going to pay a vendor within 7 days, 15 days, 30 days, what does that prompt pay discount look like? Those are conversations we can have with our vendors. I don't think those conversations are had enough, even from the level of, I know that on certain TPAs, they take prompt pay discounts if they pay within 30 days or 45 days. We should have those same conversations with our vendors that, hey, if we're going to pay you within a certain amount of time, can we get a better deal on that? But those are just a few things that I think would add to the data that we could use it as an industry to have more conversations like this.
All right. So when you talk to RA folks, your ideas and Kristen's, both
Yeah,
of, yeah, not just yours,
that's right.
Josh.
No, that's I'm going to put hers first. It'll make me sound a lot more smart than I really am.
Well, great ideas from both of you. All right, let's wrap it up. So, Kristen, we'll have you start us off. Just some closing thoughts. What would you like to see the industry do next with this information? and with all the opportunities to do better, what would you say?
I very much appreciate know-how and RIA for gathering all this information is no small task. And it has a lot of great information in it. I hope that people utilize, if they don't want to read the whole thing, utilize AI and summarize this tool, implement benchmarking metrics at your businesses. You're seeing what I'm seeing is a rapid sophistication in the business as you have consolidation and as you have private equity partners that are coming into it. And so get ahead and actually spend time with your senior leadership team to decipher this report, establish a scorecard, establish KPIs, and get ahead of your peers with the data that RIA and know-how provide in this report.
Thank you, Kristen. And Josh, this is it. Final words of advice. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think again, Kristen touched on it well. One of the things I would say is to make sure what I love from the industry is to continue to contribute, like share your information with know-how and the RIA when they do this. Know-how does this to give back to the industry, and really to help us all benchmark and understand where we're at. We mentioned it. The data that comes out of this is only as good as the data that goes into it. And so one of the things I would love to see is for even more contractors to share their data and to share it whenever we see these things come up. The other thing is, Kristen touched on it, is just for us to continue as an industry to have these discussions. When we have intelligent discussions around data, takes some of the emotion out of it. Business is always emotional, especially when it's a family-owned business, but it takes some of the emotion out of, hey, you're just trying to not pay me, or you don't want to pay me what I'm worth. When we have data, it allows us to have intelligent discussions with whether it's TPAs, insurance vendors, or the people that we're actually doing the work for, the homeowners, to have discussions about what is and what isn't working, and how do we make a healthy change, or how do we work towards something that can facilitate or sustain this industry moving forward for not only all of us, but the next generation of restorers that are joining the industry.
Thank you both for your time today. Great information. And if someone can't read the whole report, they've got this to rely on.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
I'll see you both at the RA show.
Yes, it sounds great. Nice to talk to you both.